I'm going to start with a very broad view of what Asia Pacific looks like, including Japan and Korea. And then we're going to drill down into Southeast Asia. So here in Asia Pacific, Pattern operates in a very complex ecosystem of porous borders. Porous borders meaning it's not actually hard for me to buy products. Maybe I'm sitting in Singapore. So it's not hard for me to organize a shipment of products coming from Malaysia into Singapore. I might be buying in Malaysia because especially with currency fluctuations, it's crazy. Significantly cheaper for me to buy products into Malaysia and bring them into Singapore, set up a storefront on one of the local marketplaces and sell at a discount compared to a distributor who is authorized. So borders in this region are massively porous. Lots of examples of Chinese tourists going to Australia, taking the products back to China, milk powder, some of the vitamins and multi-supplements. And that's how those brands became established in China, because people were taking suitcases from Australia into China and then selling to their friends. So it's an exceptionally complex ecosystem. And there are so many marketplaces, as you can see. There's 20 plus across at least 8 languages, and data is fragmented and inconsistent at best. Let me drill down into the marketplaces a little bit and give you an example. So you can see where we're going to drill down into Southeast Asia. It's really dominated by Shopee and Lazada. And then you can see Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and I think for Lazada, there's also Taiwan. Now, unless you're a Nike or an Adidas, maybe a Puma, a big brand, you have to deal with the platforms in each country individually. So it's not as though you have someone at Lazada centrally, regionally, that is going to be managing your relationship across all the markets. No. You have to deal with each individual market locally, and that's putting a big stress on you, the brand. So Pattern takes that stress away and manages that process, consolidating and aggregating all the reporting so you have a single view of activity that you can make sense of real time. So I said I'd drill down into the marketplaces, and the 2 key ones are really Shopee and Lazada. Yes, there are some on the peripheral. They primarily operate locally, but these are the key ones, Shopee and Lazada. You can get a sense of the volumes as well. 343 million visits a month for Shopee, 128 million visits a month for Lazada. Here's a little interesting fact as well. Shopee typically appeals to the female audience. Lazada typically appeals to the male audience. So, my wife is one of those people, she gravitates to Shopee, I gravitate to Lazada. And I don't know how that happens, and that's just not with my household. That is something that is true with so many people in the region. Key markets, Indonesia has to be the biggest. It's such a big market, Indonesia, for Shopee. Vietnam and Taiwan. For Lazada, slightly different, Philippines, Thailand, and again, Indonesia is appearing in there. So I said for Lazada, it appeals more to the male audience. So interestingly, we still see health and beauty as a leading sort of category, but electronics is there, and you're not seeing electronics in Shopee. So those are a couple of insights of working with the local marketplaces. So just to recap of what I've said there so far. They work independently. So if you want to work across 3 different countries, you'll probably have to have 3 different relationships for each of the marketplaces. They have their strengths and their weaknesses in terms of their demographic and the categories in which sell. Asian marketplaces also operate slightly differently than, let's say, if you're used to selling on Amazon. Asian marketplaces, it's much more of an immersive experience where throughout that purchase process, there's live streaming activities, there's incentives to stay. When I purchase on Lazada, I get coins and I get to redeem those coins. They really do their best to keep me into the platform. It's a very, very different experience when I go and shop on, let's say, Amazon, where I have an intent. I evaluate by looking at sort of different ratings and stars and what people are saying. I purchase, and then I go and leave a review myself. That all happens within the Asian platforms without doubt, but you can see the engagement with Asian platforms actually starts a lot earlier. And that comes back to a little bit about what I was saying, where the sort of marketplaces like Amazon, they're driven by algorithms, and you would expect algorithms to be present in Asian platforms, and they are, but you still have your category managers, which are highlighting what SKUs are the most interesting, what is it that people want. So they have sort of shelf space within the platform to then drive awareness of those products. So then as a TP, we are having to think about, okay, how do we ensure the brands that we're representing have that awareness to drive that consideration within the platform? So we're having to create a lot more content. We're having to do live streaming. We're having to incorporate KOLs. So much more immersive experience with extended functionalities. And we're constantly having to do that engagement for every single SKU. And I think that's a really interesting insight for an Asian marketplace versus a Western marketplace. I don't want to go through all of these, and you can see on the screen for yourself, but some of the things that you need to consider when trading in Southeast Asia. Every country has different rules and regulations, right? And that's really important to consider. So before you're getting too excited about the population of Indonesia or launching into Vietnam or into Singapore, every market has their own rules and regulations around ingredients, around manufacturing processes. So you really need to have an appreciation of what can and cannot go into the market. And that will vary from cross-border to domestic trading, work with pattern, and we can identify what those rules and regulations are. It's also a very diverse consumer group. I mentioned I'm living in Singapore. GDP here is significantly higher than anywhere else in the region. How I purchase is significantly different. Everyone here has credit cards. You might be working in Indonesia where there still could be cash on delivery, which I think is sitting there in the operations section. On jumping down to a little bit around distribution, again, every market has its own currency, so that comes back to then your RRP and trying to have a consistent RRP strategy across all the different markets. I talked about declining RRP and how you manage imports and counterfeits, and again, how you work with the marketplaces. So if there is a counterfeit or a parallel import, then how you work with the marketplace to get that shut down will vary not just by platform, but by market as well. So pattern, own, and hold those relationships. So we get that done pretty quickly. Jumping over to operations logistics, Indonesia, I don't know, Philippines, I don't know how many islands they have. It's huge. So how are you delivering? What's your commitment? Those are sort of things that you really need to spend a lot of time on. So how quickly can you get those goods into the consumer hands? At Pattern, we have a very solid distribution network. So we can typically get the products to the consumer within an acceptable period that the consumer is familiar with, but logistics can be a real headache. And marketing, the number of social channels, it's complex, how you work with KOLs. KOLs quickly go in and out of fashion, as do influencers, how you leverage live streaming. Again, it varies by market. So it's very complex. Don't look at Southeast Asia as just Southeast Asia. Break it out into each individual market and look at the complexities of those markets. Pattern helps within that process. I just want to touch on this because I think it's interesting, and I still have a lot of conversations with brands on this, and it does bring a smile to my face. If you look at what's manufactured in Asia Pacific, it clearly dominates anywhere else in the world. So there are so many products manufactured in the region. So what sells and what doesn't sell? So we're constantly, when brands come to Pattern and say, hey, will you be our trade partner? We're looking for what's a unique value proposition for that product, right? What makes it unique? What makes it special? We're looking to know, have they got trademark and patent registration, right? That's going to be important, especially around counterfeits. And if they haven't, We help with that process, but that's something that we really look to and take into account. And does it meet regulatory requirements? Now, both of these are Chinese examples, and we're talking about Southeast Asia, but I think they're interesting. Like Japanese fish products into China is highly regulated, and you need a lot of certificates. Why? Because of the nuclear disaster that happened in Japan in 2011. The Chinese are naturally concerned for their citizens and radiation. So you have to have the necessary sort of regulatory approval from Japanese fisheries and whoever else to say that this fish, in whatever form, can be imported into China. Another one is cow tissue. They're worried about mad cow disease entering their food supply in China. So natural concerns, any country is going to be concerned. It's just that the Chinese are probably a little bit more prominent and forthcoming in what can and what cannot go into the market. And they're probably a little bit more transparent than a lot of other markets like that. I'm from the UK originally, so although I've lived in Asia Pacific a long time, we have a saying in the UK, don't bring coal to the coal mine. So a lot of the products that we get presented, they're actually being manufactured in China, or manufactured in Asia. So we want to avoid products that are manufactured in Asia, sent to the US or Europe, and then coming back to Asia at a premium. That's not how it should be working. You can see this sort of micro needles. I can buy it on Tmall for US dollars, maybe $1.50, $2, and yet a very similar product is selling on US Amazon for around $10 US, so a multiple of 5. So naturally, as a consumer, you're going to go for the cheaper product. Can be very challenging, I think, to have a USP on that type of product. So we're looking to avoid those. And again, just because it sells well in your country doesn't mean it's going to sell well in Asia. I've used a bit of an extreme example for fun, but like a sort of awning for a camper van. That's not such a hot product in sort of Asia, maybe Australia, but the rest of sort of Asia Pacific, not really. So that's why we go away and do analysis for brands to ensure that it's a good product and a good product fit. And again, we've got to make sure that there's premiumization. So perception is reality. So USA and Australia, this region, very fond of their vitamins and multi-supplements. Japan and Korea are known for beauty. USA and Europe, medical over-the-counter goods. So again, make sure that you have a USP based on the origin. Last slide. This is a case study for an oral care product where we grew in Southeast Asia. I think they were having challenges with parallel imports. Maybe the RRP wasn't where they wanted it to be. They were having challenges with warranty. So essentially, Pattern took over the business for this particular product, built a strong B2C relationship with platforms in the markets in which they wanted to sell. But then we also took it D2C, so we are managing their D2C component. And actually now for this particular example, we're working on B2B and taking it to dentists. So it's an all-round solution that Pattern offer to the brands that we work with and being able to deliver. So I think that's enough from me. That's a bit of a monologue. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope there were some takeouts for you in this presentation. Thank you very much for listening.